Welcome to the Work Awesome podcast. This is episode number 2, Getting into Government Contracting. Today I have Sarah, Nikki, and Chad with me to talk about this topic. And let's just jump into the description to get that out of the way. The path to working for a government contractor or directly for the government can be downright confusing, loaded with acronyms, security clearances, background checks, and so much more. The process can be tiring and might deter you from your dream job. In this episode, we'll lay out all the secrets for getting through this process and doing work that you love. So let's start with some backgrounds of our guests today. So Sarah, this is the first time that you're on this season. What I've been having the guests do is explain what they do for the company, help hopefully our listeners get a little bit more background on the type of work that AVIAN does. So can you give us a little bit of information of what your job is for the company?
Absolutely. So I'm
Move this a little closer to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm the talent resource manager here at AVIAN, and so primarily what I do is I manage our recruiting here, which is really fun because I get to help bring new team members into AVIAN. I also work on our training and development as well, so that's kind of where the talent manager comes in. But yes, oftentimes I'm the person who is connecting with candidates.
Yeah, so Sarah's probably going to be one of the folks that you talk with if you apply for a job and make it through that first round. Sarah will most likely reach out to you, or her teammate will reach out to you and get you started on the road to hopefully working for the company.
Absolutely, and I've been here almost 5 years now.
Me too. I just passed 4 years, so I'm working on 5 now, which is
crazy.
Yeah, it's very, very crazy. All right, so Nikki, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I am a test resource manager. I support one of AVIAN's contracts, the 5-1 contract, which means I work in test and evaluation. I sit at a test team and help with things like scheduling resources and scheduling flight events and test points and all the different things that go along with a test program.
Yeah, and Air 5-1 is actually our largest contract for the company, so more likely than not, there's going to be a few guests on the show where you'll hear that their customer is Air 5-1. Chad, how about your background?
So my position with the company is kind of twofold. To the customer, I am a senior Unix systems administrator. I work on Pax River in one of the IT departments, doing systems administration on various Unix and Linux systems. But with AVIAN, I am also a program manager. So I'm responsible for the employees on our contract that are working in the data center as well. So I've been a part of AVIAN for, I think, 4 years now, somewhere in there. And with this contract the entire time, it's actually switched a couple times. It's had 2 different versions since I've been on the contract. So I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit on dealing with the government world. But yeah, with the program manager position, helping hire new employees, helping train new employees. I've also helped with contract writing when bidding on new contracts and when rebidding on the contract that we're on now. So it's been quite a bit of different skills that I've learned through this position.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get into a lot of what you just talked about because it does directly correlate with the government contracting world and what it kind of means to work for a government contractor. So let's just jump into those questions that I have. And let's start at the very, very bottom. And Sarah, this might be a question better for you to answer. Nikki, Chad, if you have anything to add, please feel free to jump in. But what are some of those basic qualifications or requirements that a candidate has to have? And this is going to be, I know it depends on the contract a lot of the time, but some of those basic requirements for candidates to have to get a government job or a government contracting job.
So that's a great question, Ian. So we have to, as a government contractor, make sure that we are keeping our end of the bargain in terms of making sure that we are bringing qualified candidates to the position. So that job description that's out on our website, we have to make sure those candidates meet those requirements. So it's not that we don't think that you'd be a great employee or anything like that, but if you don't have those minimum qualifications, we cannot hire you. And oftentimes, one of those qualifications is a clearance. So occasionally, we have the ability to bring someone in or to hire someone that doesn't have a clearance, but we cannot start them without that clearance in place. So one of the things, if
I
you're
was one of those.
transitioning from a, go ahead,
Yeah.
Chad.
Yeah, I was one of those. I
think
didn't
all
have
three
a
of us were
clearance
then. Yeah.
when I
Yeah,
when I got
absolutely.
hired. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you mind, Chad, just kind of talking a little bit about what that looked like for you?
Well,
We've hired people that have needed clearances for your positions too, I believe.
yes. So, for me personally, I interviewed with AVIAN for a different position than what I'm in now, well before I got actually hired by AVIAN, and the AVIAN really liked my interview. Unfortunately, the first position that I interviewed for, the prime contractor didn't go with me. They went with another candidate, but and one of the main reasons was a security clearance. But AVIAN was like, well, we want you to work for us. We just need to find the right fit, and we need to get you a clearance. So I actually had a clearance before I was even hired by AVIAN, because they put me through the clearance process. So that way, when the next job that they thought I could fit opened up, they could put me in for the interview and say, hey, we have somebody with the clearance that we'd like to hire. Would you like to interview them? That kind of thing. And ended up getting the next position that opened up that they thought I could fill.
Okay, and my guess is in that situation, because we do have to have a contract that we put you on for a position. So my guess is that there was a position that we had in mind, that we knew that we were going to have open, that we specifically put you in for, because we can't typically put
Right. Yeah, and it was
for clearance.
It was put in for the original position that I had applied for.
Exactly. So we do have to have a position that we're tying, and a contract. It's really a contract that we're tying a clearance to. And what happens is there's a wait period. We don't have control of that time period. We don't have control of the clearance process. That's not an AVIAN process. So we don't always know how long it's going to take. I've seen clearances come through pretty quickly, but I've also seen clearances take a very long time.
And mine took
and
6 months.
We don't. Yes, exactly. Actually, I know of someone who took almost a year because they had a lot of foreign travel.
And it's also dependent on a lot of other things outside of
Yes.
AVIAN. So it could be at some points of the year, it could take a month. At some points of the year, it could take
Yep.
6 months. So
Absolutely. Our security team is super fast at making sure that they get all the paperwork in on time or immediately. But once that's done, we don't have any control over that, and we can't determine who qualifies for a clearance and who doesn't.
Right.
So if there are issues that a candidate is concerned about, it's really important that they're honest with themselves and with the security team, and in making sure that they're very, very honest on their when they're answering the questions on for the security process.
Right. So having a security clearance is definitely an important, or being able to attain one either, is one of the biggest factors when trying to get a government position or a government contracting position. Chad, I want to go back to one thing you said, and you may not even have realized you said it, but the difference between a prime contract and a subcontract. So does anyone want to kind of tackle the differences there?
So, and we actually have one guest who's on a prime and one who's on a sub. So it's kind of perfect. Yeah. So Nikki, do you want to talk a little bit about what it means to be on a prime contract? And then Chad, what it means to be a PM on a sub, if you don't mind, just kind of going over that a little bit. Because that is a term that not everybody, we use it so often here, we don't think about it being kind of a government contracting word.
Sure. So, right. So the AVIAN's Air 5-1 contract, the one that I support, is a prime, or Avian is the prime on the contract, meaning that they essentially won the bid. Avian won when we competed for that contract. So they're essentially the ones that are holding it. And then from there can be subs. And I'll let Chad talk about that.
Yeah. And on the Air 51 contract, I assume we do. I don't know.
Yes, we do
have
subs.
subcontractors. So basically, if you're visualizing this, Avian on the prime contracts is at the top, and then we have other companies that fall underneath of us. Mm-hmm. So Chad, go ahead and kind of explain the subcontract side.
Yeah, so subcontracts, a lot of primes require a certain amount of subs on a contract, or every contract is a little bit different. But subcontractor is when a different company than the prime has employees on the same contract, but we work through the prime contract. So when we hire somebody new, we have to get the prime contractor has to approve of the open position, like the availability of the position. And we might really like a candidate, but the prime has the overall say whether they get hired. They also control a lot of the budgeting. They provide us, hey, this is the kind of area in terms of salary that this person can fall into. So everything where the prime contract's main customer is the government and the contract that they're on, for the subcontractor, we have technically we have two customers we're working for. We're working for the government, and we're also working for the prime contractor as well. So it's kind of twofold there. And being a program manager there, it's there's a lot of communication between me and then the program manager of the program that is from the prime, going back and forth saying, hey, what positions are you looking for? This person is getting promoted. We need to talk about their salary. Things like that. We need extra time because for our contract, we're a very unique contract where we're a 24/7 data center, and there's times where we're going to need to work more than what the contract states, and getting approvals for those kinds of things. There's a lot that goes into with that communication between the sub and the prime.
Yeah, and when I was supporting a contract, I was also on a subcontract. So I can kind of talk to it a little bit, but basically one of the things that helps with the prime and sub is that maybe the prime specializes in X, and Avian can come in and fulfill other requirements that the prime might not have the capability to do. So for me, it was that our prime, I think, did a lot of the administrative services for the program office, but the subcontractors, Avian, did the communications work for that program office. So definitely just kind of working as a team to fulfill all the requirements of a contract is a pretty good way to explain that.
And it's also in the government world, there's a lot of certain specifications of what requirements are needed for certain positions. And, one outlet for trying to find those candidates is a lot harder to find some qualified candidates when you can say, hey, I'm looking for somebody that fills X, Y, and Z. Do you guys have someone that could fill that requirement, or could you help us look for someone that can fill that requirement? Sometimes it's also, we're having trouble filling these positions. Let me see if we can find someone who might have other expertise or other avenues that they can search for that kind of talent to help fill a very specific position.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So let's jump to the next question that I have written down. Say a candidate fulfills all the requirements for the contract, has the security clearance, gets hired. What are some of the things that candidate should expect on the first week, the first month type of situation? So obviously training is a big thing. Do you guys want to talk about anything else besides training?
I mean, for me personally, and for my contract, and I know a lot of people have had this same issue on other contracts as well, the first week or month can always be, maybe a little bit slower paced than what you might expect, a year down the road. There's a lot of accounts, forms that need to be filled out, signed, approved, go through different IT channels and NMCI to get your asset. there could be a lot of sitting and waiting with that training as well. You know,
Yep.
waiting, you might not be able to do every single job function that you're supposed to be doing for a little bit until you've gone through all your trainings, until all of your forms have been assigned by the appropriate government leads and your asset is finally turned over, your accounts are created, you know, trying to get an appointment to get your CAC. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's right off the start that might seem a little tedious and might seem a little like busy work. But it, you know, at the start, you know, you can expect it to be a little slower than what you might have, you know, down the road. Just for the simple fact it takes a while to get some of that process moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also add,
Go ahead. You're fine.
I would
Go
also add that on top of the forms and getting your computer and all of that kind of stuff, if you're new to government contracting, you probably also don't have a CAC. You probably don't have access to any of the buildings you need to get into, or any of the spaces. So that was a huge thing for me. Was I joined AVIAN, I didn't have a CAC, but I had to sit on base. So then I had to figure out a way to get on base, to get my CAC, to also get to where my desk was going to be. So I would say that first month is kind of like drinking from a fire hose. You're just taking in all this information and trying to get settled. And it's a little bit overwhelming, but once you get all that figured out, it's much more smooth sailing from there.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of jumping in feet first in that aspect of it, because I remember my first day here. It was like, all right, so you have your security clearance. Now you have to make the appointment at the CAC office to make sure you have, like you said, the CAC, which is I can't remember what the first C stands for, but it's the card you need to basically get onto a base. And then once you're on base, you have to make sure you're showing that card to the security officer so that they know they let you in the building. And then you have to find the actual office, because Pax River, where we're at, it's a pretty large base. And if you have never been on there before, and you don't know where you're going, you could definitely get lost and possibly on a runway or something. So there's definitely a big learning curve there. And I think our program managers do a pretty good job with helping, especially the first timers, people we know have never been on base before, helping them figure it out.
Yep.
Well, anything else?
I do want to add that the one nice thing, even though that there's a lot going on and a lot of stuff that you need to wait for or sign, or, you know, trainings that you need to go through, one nice thing is most of the time there's processes that have already been developed, have already been set up. And it's not, yes, you might be, you know, drinking from a fire hose, taking all this information in, but you're kind of aware and know what's coming, because they have these processes in place of how things are supposed to go, what you're supposed to do for different things. It really makes it's not like you're going into a guessing game. You know what's coming. It's just sometimes, you know, this process might take anywhere from 3 days to a week. Sometimes it's just waiting for the process to complete, but at least you know what to expect. So there's that helps put some of the anxiety at ease, knowing, hey, this is what's happening. It just takes a couple days for that process to complete.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this video on YouTube. I just want to jump in and say that if you are not following the Work Awesome Network on all social media platforms, I highly encourage that. It's the place to get updates on blog posts, on new episodes, on basically anything related to the Work Awesome Network. So jump over to wherever you get your content from: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're on all the platforms. If you are interested, we also publish these same episodes on audio platforms, so you can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. So if you would rather listen to this in an audio format in the car, on the way to work, in the office, I encourage you to jump over to those audio platforms and listen there. I also want to say, if you're interested in learning about the company behind the Work Awesome Network, AVIAN, you can jump over to the AVIAN website at avian.com, AVIAN.com. Thanks again for watching this video. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. It helps the video out. It helps it get in front of more people. Thank you again. And now back to this episode. Right. So that was a lot. Let's talk about and kind of hopefully spin this in a positive way, like Chad was just doing. What becomes easier? What became easier over time as so you're past that 1 month stage, you're working, maybe it's been 6 months or a year. What became easier for you guys as you got into the spin of working for your customer?
For me, I would say the thing that was really hard in the beginning that quickly got easier was learning the language of how people talk and how people write emails, and how there's a whole library of acronyms that I had no idea existed before I became a government contractor. And I just found that within the first couple of months of constantly sitting in meetings where people are using these acronyms and sending emails every single day with different terms and addressing people by different military ranks and things of that nature, that you learn it quick. It's just a matter of doing it. But I think it can be very discouraging at first, but it gets so much easier the more you do it.
Yeah, the acronyms are a lot. The other thing is like call signs. So there's some people that's like, hey, that's Bill. And the other person's like decoy. It's like, so knowing the different names for everybody, knowing, like you said, the ranks is definitely challenging at first, but does get a lot easier.
Yeah, I definitely second the acronym part. I remember the first email I got, the person's said V/R and then their name. I'm like, virtual reality? I don't know. It wasn't until someone had typed it out fully, very respectfully, I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. I mentioned process before. That was something that got easier. There's a lot of processes, especially in the IT world, on how different things are supposed to go, different routes that you're supposed to take for different types of tickets or problems or things like that. That at the break, there's just so much. There's all these processes that are set in place that help with a lot of your introduction, but can also be overwhelming just because there's so many and you're supposed to follow each process for different situations. But as time went on, you kind of don't even realize that you're doing the process, or you don't even realize that, hey, I already know what to do here because I've done it a few times. So it's definitely, as you go on, learning the process of what needs to be done in what order, or who you need to talk to. That is always, something difficult to learn at the break, but becomes very natural very quickly as you go through your daily job.
Yeah, and the VR piece, talking, for AVIAN specifically, when I onboarded, and our communications team does this. I wish the entire company did this, but we actually go through like this email etiquette rundown. So you have a heads up of this is what VR means, or who you should send that to. Like there's different etiquettes that you should probably follow if you're working with military ranks specifically, because there are some folks that are very high ranked and do deserve a certain level of respect when you're emailing them even. So along the same lines as that question, what are some things that you wish you knew at the beginning? So some of the things I wrote down were like the rules of timekeeping. Like we have to fill out our timesheet every day by a certain time. The supervisory structures, you touched on the email stuff a little bit, in the DoD culture. Anything else that you wish you knew coming into the government contracting world?
So for me, I was lucky to have family who had been in the government contracting world and kind of gave me some heads up on some of the things that I can expect. For me personally, it was just, I wish I knew on how process oriented everything was. At the start for me, it was kind of hard to get through everything. Why do I have to send this over to this person? Why can't I just do this? It was, the whys behind certain things are some of the things that really cleared up why some of these processes were in place. And it definitely made it less, why do I have to do this, to, now I understand. This is why. It was a little frustrating at first coming from the private world to the government world, where in the private sector you can, if you need to do something, you can do it. There's not many hoops you need to go through, but in the government world, knowing that this process is in place to protect this or to make sure that unauthorized access doesn't happen, and this is why we follow this process, and that kind of stuff. Knowing it off the break would have made it less frustrating off the start and less confusing. But now that I know, it's like, okay, this makes a lot more sense. So when I get new employees that come in, when we go over a process on why something happens, I've taken my experience and have gone, hey, we follow this process to do this, 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 and this. But the reason we're doing this, as complicated or as confusing as it might be, is because we need to protect our people out in the field. We need to protect our test teams, and we need to protect this information. And this is why we're following these steps. And people are like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And so I try to make sure that as a program manager, as a teacher for the team that I'm on, to make sure that I explain that ahead of time when people come in fresh off the street.
The processes are definitely one of the more frustrating parts were one of the more frustrating parts for me, because like you said, I always worked in the private sector, and going on base and having an idea and then having to run that same idea through 5 or 6 people. It's like, well, I'd rather just have the idea and run after it, which is ultimately why I moved to the corporate side, because there is a little bit more flexibility for that. But the processes were, when I supported a government customer, were one of the more frustrating things for me.
Yeah. And for me, I think we touched on this a little bit, but I wish I had a better understanding of the security clearance process. I think I came in blind to that. So I definitely wasn't prepared for how patient you needed to be going through that process. And also, when you're applying for security clearance, the amount of information that they need is crazy. It's something I had no idea. And I think if I would have had a better understanding of some of the things that they would ask for, I could have looked back in my address book from 20 years ago and find where my first, I don't know, childhood home address was, things like that I just was like, I don't know this stuff. I have to go find it. And I have to find emails and phone numbers and all of these things. So definitely would have been helpful if I could have prepared for that a little bit better.
I don't know about you, but I had to call my mom and dad a few times. Like, hey, what was our address over here?
I definitely had the same experience. So there's tiers to security clearances. I can't imagine what that top tier looks like, because I was at pretty much the bottom tier, and there was a lot, like you said, a lot of information you have to know and fill out and look back at records. So the last question I have for you guys: what are some challenges of working for a government contractor versus being a government employee? So Chad, I know your wife works directly for the government now. She actually was an AVIAN employee at one point. So maybe you can speak to this, but I know, I don't know. I'll let you guys talk. Is there a difference between being a contractor versus being a government employee?
I think so. I think one of the biggest challenges and fears, anxieties, that kind of thing, is that when you're a contractor, you're on a contract. There's usually dates on that contract. This contract is good for 5 years, and then you have to rebid on the contract. That's something that can be kind of off-putting for some people, where I'm good for these next 5 years, but we have to rebid on the contract. What happens if we don't win the contract back? What happens if somebody else wins it? That's definitely something that's a little bit different than working for the government, where the government is. I work for the government. I have a job with the government. My contracts I might change positions within the government, but I don't have a limited time contract.
Right.
But like I said, the contract that I'm on has changed twice. It was a different prime when I first started. It was a different prime, and then the new prime took over, and I was able to help convince them to rehire AVIAN as a sub, which was nice because that was not originally one of the plans. And then then had to rebid on the contract for various reasons with the prime again, and we kept the contract. So that's one of the main differences for me. A lot of the work that we do is the same kind of work that, at least in my contract, a lot of the work that I'm doing, my government counterparts are pretty much doing the same thing.
Right.
Other than some of the government leads who do more of the direct customer interfacing, where we interface more with the government people that we work with versus the customers. But that's one of the big things with government versus contractor that I've noticed as a main difference.
Yeah, and I did mean to bring that up earlier where, like you said, contracts have lengths. So there is that kind of unknowing space where we get to the end of the contract. You can either, the company can bid to re-win that contract, or, I mean, I don't know if it's very common, but I assume that some companies just don't rebid on work at all.
Sometimes they might not qualify for it anymore,
That makes sense.
too.
So there is that kind of job security piece of, if you're a government employee, you know that you have that job security, whereas a contractor maybe not as much. The other thing that I meant to bring up earlier was government shutdowns and how they can affect our work. Even, I mean, that's on both sides, on the contracting side and the government employee side. I don't want to talk too much about that because it's a very dark topic, but Nikki, did you have any thoughts about contracting versus government employees?
I think Chad kind of summed it up well. I think that there is generally a negative stigma for some reason about being a government contractor versus just working for the government.
Right.
But what I've found is I think as a government contractor, there's a little bit more flexibility. You have, if you work for a government contractor, such as AVIAN, there are X amount of contracts, and say you wanted to switch from, you don't want to be in IT anymore, you want to be in engineering. I think that there's more opportunity when you're in AVIAN or within a government contracting business to be able to switch between those, if you're qualified, of course. But I just think the flexibility is a little bit better with the government contractor.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I guess I'm like the perfect example. I've started working for AV and just realized I didn't enjoy working directly for the customer, and was lucky enough to fall into the corporate side of it. So like you're saying, there's a lot of flexibility, a lot more flexibility working for a government contractor than working for the government.
To add on to that, me personally, from what I've seen, there's a lot of room for growth in the government on the contracting side as well.
Yes.
I came in as a newbie, so to speak, and now I'm one of the leads, and and it happened relatively fast. I would say within about 2.5 years, I went from being a new guy to one of the leads, and you don't really see that as much in the government side. From my understanding, there's kind of a structure and a plan on the government side on this is how you're going to start out, this is where you're going to move to, this is how your growth works on the government side, where on the contracting side it was much more rapid and much more rewarding when they saw that you're doing a great job and like, hey, let's move you up. There's a lot more flexibility on that as well.
Yeah. Nice. I imagine, I know for obviously military ranks, there's only a certain amount of spots per rank. Is that correct? I look at Sarah because I know her husband is retired military. But like, for example, admirals, you can only have so many admirals. I imagine it's the same way for civilian employees as well. So like on base here, there's like 2 or 3 top level employees, and there will always only be those 2 or 3. So like you're saying, the growth is potentially not as quickly as the contracting side as it is on the government employee side. So definitely something to think about if you're looking at either side of the fence. Any last minute thoughts on getting into government contracting? I think we covered a lot of really great stuff.
And I think the big thing that I would say from my standpoint is, and I think both Nikki and Chad talked about this too, is patience. We don't have a great deal of flexibility with requirements, And we sometimes we can wait for a clearance for a position, and sometimes we can't.
Yeah.
And sometimes the only way someone would really have had the experiences that they needed to qualify for a more senior position would have been to have had a clearance already and be working in a position that would be supporting similar type of work. That I'm not trying to be discouraging, because we love to bring people into the government contracting world and start the clearance process. What I'm saying is, don't give up and keep an eye on job openings and qualifications, and really know that that if you do meet those qualifications and the contractor is able to, chances are they will, be willing to wait that time. But it's just not something that we can always do.
Yeah. And I think maybe this is a topic for a future episode, but I think a lot of people don't realize the cost of bringing somebody in, and that cost just grows exponentially if they don't have a security clearance. So maybe I think that's a topic for another episode. So definitely look out for that one.
Yeah, when you're waiting for a clearance, if you've hired someone and you're waiting for a clearance, and I'm imagining, Chad, this is probably what happened in your scenario initially, that work is not being done.
Right.
So there's not someone in that position supporting that role. So, it's a frustrating situation for our customer as well, because they have a certain amount of work that needs to be done. And if there's not someone in that role, then other people are picking up that work, and the longer that happens, the more frustrating it is all around. So it's not that we don't want to put someone in for a clearance. It's that sometimes we just don't have that option, and we have to be sensitive to the needs of our government customer, because ultimately we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to best support them, because the work that they do is so important.
Yeah. So if there's no other thoughts to add on, I think we can wrap up this episode here. Nikki, Chad, thank you for joining me. Sarah as well, thank you for joining me. On the next episode, we're talking about discovering your career path. So going down this journey of fresh out of college, potentially going into the government sector, discovering what that path looks like after that. So look out for that one coming out next week. Again, Chad, Nikki, Sarah, thank you for joining me, and I will see everybody next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. It was so good to see everyone.
You too.